yesterday we heard from the chairman of the House Antitrust Subcommittee as Congress once again takes aim at Silicon Valley, revealing in part a growing social dilemma. What's wrong with big tech? Is it monopolistic power, security risks, data privacy issues? One former Google ethicist says there's no one issue that's the problem, it's the whole system.
Many people call this surveillance capitalism. Capitalism profiting off of the infinite tracking of everywhere everyone goes by large technology companies whose business model is to make sure that advertisers are as successful as possible. I mean, it seems kind of crazy, right? It's like the fundamental way that this stuff is designed isn't going in a good direction, like the entire thing. So it sounds crazy to say we need to change all that, but that's what we need to do.
And here now to talk more about this is Tristan Harris, co-founder of the Center for Humane Technology, and one of the prominent presences in Netflix's documentary, The Social Dilemma, which I watched just the other night. Tristan, welcome. Good to have you with us.
Thanks for having me.
There's a lot of deep stuff that was in that documentary, and we'll try and get to at least some of it. But I want to begin to some of these sort of existential threats that you see technology posing. But I want to begin with a blunter kind of question. In your view, is Facebook, is Google, are they moral companies? Do they have a moral compass at their core or not?
I think when you meet a lot of the people at these companies, you find very well-intentioned people who are trying to do the best that they can. When you hear the executives, whether it's Mark Zuckerberg or Sheryl Sandberg, say certain things that don't make any sense to anyone who understands what's really going on, you have to realize it's sort of like listening to a hostage in a hostage video. Nothing that hostage makes sense, nothing the hostage says makes sense until you see the gun that's being held off screen that's holding them hostage, and that's their business model. Their business model is about giving you more and more affirmative, narrower and narrower views of reality, which fundamentally means as you crank the machine, it starts shredding reality into these narrower and narrower views for each of us, which polarize and divides society. That's the fundamental operation of the business. It's not a few bad apples, it's not a few bad Facebook groups, it's the entire structure that's about creating echo chambers and incentivizing that, which fundamentally take down the life support systems of society and of democracy. So I don't think that it's a specific set of bad people. I think there's negligence involved because we now know this to be so clear. The question is, what are we going to do about it? Because they're trapped. They can't change unless there's external pressure, which is why I think this film is so important, because it's creating kind of a global consciousness awakening, almost like a silent spring or an inconvenient truth, but for the tech industry's toxic business model.
It's very interesting. I want to poke a little harder here, though. If you say that the executives in these companies have become a prisoner of their own business models, the incentives there, does that mean that they have lost their moral compass? I want to go back to that question of the moral center in the two companies that dominate the advertising space online.
Yeah, I appreciate going deeper in this question. I think that Zuckerberg's number one goal, it said that he has the book, The Master's Switch, at his bedside table. That's a book about the regulation of the telecommunications industry. I think what you can interpret from that book, if you read it, which is a great book by Tim Wu, is that his number one objective is to avoid getting regulated by the government. That might explain why he's more friendly to sort of, let's say, advertising policies that don't go against the president or the current Department of Justice. So, are they moral? I mean, I think by prioritizing the success of your own business and company over what's good for democracy and seeing that it is falling apart in front of your eyes, I'd say there's some immorality there. Yes.
All right. Let me stick with kind of the theme here, and I remember very vividly the famous Eagles lyric from Hotel California, "We are all just prisoners of our own device." Have we all been captured by this technology so that the 7 hours a day that we spend checking our phones, that we have become prisoner to it, and you say here it is destroying our sense-making at a time we need sense-making the most?
Yeah, I want to be really careful here, because when we say that we're prisoners of a situation, that creates a kind of a victim dynamic. It's hard for us to take responsibility or to feel like, oh, it's only going to when this big system is going to change. And I want to be really thoughtful about that, because I want people to feel empowered when they see this film and realize that it's about providing clarity about the degree of asymmetry of power between you and your prefrontal cortex brain and the supercomputer and thousands of engineers behind the screen that are calculating the perfect thing to light up your nervous system and to give you those sort of dopamine rewards. So I think what's enlightening for people is recognizing there really isn't just this neutral product waiting to be used. It's a system that's based on manipulation. A good example of this is for kids. How does TikTok steal users from Instagram? They're very similar. They're about posting videos and getting likes and comments, etc. Well, they sort of inject each video with social growth hormone. What I mean by that is if you post a video to TikTok, it actually inflates the number of likes and views that you get. So a child who wants attention, we're all desiring attention and validation from other people, they post that same video on TikTok instead of Instagram, they'll get even more sense of people paying attention to me. And that's that race to the bottom of the brainstem that they're all trapped within. So fundamentally, I think that this especially affects youth and minors, and I think this is of concern to all parents, especially in a time when they're putting their kids in front of YouTube and screen time more than ever with coronavirus. But it's really affecting all of us. I think the cool thing about this film is it's showing people that this is a universal human phenomenon. We are all trapped in a meat suit mind that has limited instincts. When I was a magician as a kid, what we learned is that every single mind has the same vulnerabilities. The problem is we have a technology environment that's all built on exploiting those vulnerabilities, like a backdoor into a computer system, except that computer system is our brain.
Right. Kelly?
Sure, Tristan, it's Kelly here, and I was going to ask you about the big tech report this week because after seeing some of the conclusions from that, after watching your film, I still think a lot of these solutions are not legislative. They have a lot to do with making people aware of how we're being manipulated and just kind of being smarter about that. And I think a lot of us have been on that journey about kind of hacking the hacks, so to speak. Do you see any obvious legislative solutions here? Because I'm not sure that I do.
Yeah, Kelly, it's a great question. I mean, I think this is a very complex and nuanced topic. When I zoom out, and I just want to say, if you look at the growth rate of the harms, so the growth rate of mental health, addiction, conspiracy theories, groupthink, personalization, breakdown of truth, compared to the growth rate of changes we're seeing at the tech companies, they're taking down some accounts, they're taking down some networks of Russian bots, things like that, or the growth rate of legislation. When these two lines diverge, the growth rate of the harms and the growth rate of changes we're seeing, that's the fundamental problem. As E.O. Wilson, the sociobiologist said, the problem of humanity is we have Paleolithic emotions and brains, we have medieval institutions, and we have godlike accelerating technology. If your steering wheel is lagging behind the technology, that's not going to work. So as much as we obviously want and we're going to need in the future governments to regulate and change the financial incentives so it's not based on this kind of infinite race to extract in a values-blind way, as we say in the film, so long as a whale is worth more dead than alive and a tree that's not protected in a national park is worth more as lumber than as a tree, now we're the whale, we're the tree that's being strip mined for our attention, including our own children, to keep these profits going up and up and up. So if we want to profit from our own self-destruction, then we can do that. But I think the point here is how do we set some guardrails about how we protect especially children and especially our public square and our minds from democracy. We can retrieve standards from the past like Saturday morning cartoons or the fairness doctrine for television, things like that. But I think the reason I think this film is so important is that the only thing that scales to the increasing number of harms that are accelerating is actually kind of a cultural awakening, just like we had with big tobacco. Tobacco didn't go away because we actually said this is bad for you. The real shift happened when we showed the Truth Campaign, that the people who built it actually knew that it was addictive. They hid that from the public, and then it finally came out. And one of the benefits is, of our human psychology is no one wants to feel manipulated. And I think that's why this film, The Social Dilemma, has been so powerful at starting conversations in families and in democracy.
It certainly started one in mine, Tristan, and I want to come back to several things you talked about. It sounds like you feel that the solutions to the problems you're identifying have nothing or very little to do with antitrust. You can address that as you please, but I come back to that idea that that the companies, through their seductions, through their manipulations of us, have in fact captured us. You said, I believe, to the Senate, it takes these technologies take control of what we believe while discriminating against our civility, our shared truth, and our calm. In that seems buried the thought that our democracy is at stake here in this.
100%. And while there's many different harms to sort through, the existential one, the one that's irrecoverable, is if we don't have a shared faith and a shared set of facts, or can trust that when someone brings us information, people often say we just need access to perfect information sources, but information rides on the highway of trust. And what these platforms have been doing is degrading our trust in many different sources. And there's some good reasons for that, but those have been exacerbated by social media. If we don't have a shared capacity to come to common ground, then we can't solve any of our problems. It doesn't matter which side of the political spectrum you're on. And I think one thing that I'm hopeful about, though, is that the film has been creating a new common ground about the breakdown of our common ground. It gives a new shared diagnosis about why we can't talk to each other. Why do we get triggered? We've actually heard from one person who said they actually found it was a better use of time to spend the 90 minutes, instead of watching the first presidential debate, to spend those same 90 minutes watching The Social Dilemma, the film, because it actually allowed them to come to common ground with a family member who they didn't agree with anymore, because it explains why we're not even operating on the same information. We actually encourage people, when they see the film, to do a reality swap. So you actually open up Facebook on two phones, swap feeds, and scroll through someone's feed for about 10 minutes. And suddenly you realize, before you would say, how can they be so stupid? How do they not see what I'm seeing? And the answer is they're not seeing.
They're not seeing what you're seeing. They're seeing something that has been selected for them by an algorithm that is feeding them whatever it is, whether it be a conspiracy theory or propaganda from the left or the right or whatever. Tristan, fascinating conversation. We will have you back to follow up more as this is an issue that is certainly going to be with us. The film is called The Social Dilemma. Tristan Harris, thank you.
Thanks so much for having me. Really appreciate it.
You bet.